Hello, I'm Marion O'Rourke Kaplan, and we're going to continue draping and working on the strapless bodice project by draping the over bodice. So I have my boned support bodice. It's princess line, but it has the neckline of my design, which, as you recall, we had a sketch. This is the design of the external bodice that I'm going to drape now. I have the hem marked with my draping tape, and now I need to mark my other seam lines that will form this style. So referencing your sketch, you want to put the tape across your support bodice as you want your final garment to look. When you're crossing, if you'll notice in my sketch, I don't have any means of fit for the bust. There's no darts, there's no gathers, or anything like that. There's not a princess line. There's horizontal and diagonal seams, and that's where the fit's going to be. When you're doing that, you need to draw your lines within 3/4 diameter of the bust point. And if you do that, you will be able to do seams that have ease, that is not visible in the final garment. If I brought this seam down here, where it was 2 to 3 inches from the bust point, I would have to have some gathers or a little dart, some tucks, some means of fit other than that diagonal seam. So you want to place your design accordingly so that you can meet that requirement. And the way I designed this particular garment is that this top piece will be seamless. It'll be from center front around to center back. Okay? And it's fine that there's seams in my support bodice because this over bodice is going to lay as an extra layer, and those will not be visible to the viewer. Okay. Always double check your sketch to your tape and make sure that it's indeed what your design is. So this will stop right at the sew line. I need to bring that up a little bit. I want it to be right there. This is within 3/4 of the bust point. This will give me some fit through the rib cage. And I'll still have a side seam on these. Because this spans across the waist, I won't be able to make that one piece. And then it'll meet at center back. And as I said earlier, I'm going to have a centered zipper in this particular garment, and the reason for that is that these points will meet. There's another one on the other side, and we want them to just kiss at the center, so it needs to be a centered zipper. If they didn't do that, I would probably do a lapped zipper here. Okay? So now I'm ready to drape. There won't be a seam there, but that'll be my center front, so it's easier to read than trying to go through 2-ply of muslin and feel that seam that's on the form. Okay, so I'm ready to drape, and we have the choice when we're doing an original design. We have the choice of where we start. Ideally, it's nice to drape a piece that will establish fit and design line, and then I can drape to it pieces that will have to have some additional, ease or other means of fit. So this center panel right here is a good place for me to start, rather than this, which goes all the way to the back and very possibly will have some ease in this area. So I'm going to start with this panel, and my measurement is the same rules. It's the longest, which is definitely here, okay, plus 5, and then the widest is from the side seam. I'm going to go across the bust, so that's 10. So 7 by 10, and we're going to add 5 on each of those. The grain on this, we do have it on center front, so I'm going to put it 1 inch from the selvage. And be sure and pin it into the form when you secure the center front. And I want to, in this case, I'm lifting it up. You can just follow the muslin. It'll talk to you if you pay attention. If I just pull it straight out, you can see that it has this fullness here, but I've got these horizontal seams. So I can lift it, which smooths that out there. And it puts that fullness up here, which is above my line. I don't know if you can see that in the video, but I'll get it marked here in a second. Okay, so don't drape it too tight. We do want some wearing ease in your outer bodice. This has to come right to the sew line at the neck, according to my design. So I'm going to follow my taped line. And I'm going to trim some of this excess away. Leave an inch. Okay, and then you want to give yourself some reference notches, because anytime you have a garment that's cut into multiple pieces, you want to be sure that the pieces can't get flipped or reversed or that kind of thing. So combinations of notches is a good way for that to happen. So like you would not put a notch at your princess line on both of these because it could be flipped upside down. So you want to go off of center, and maybe we just do one notch on this side, and maybe we do 2 notches on that side. That way that can't be construed as to working the opposite direction than it is made. Okay? So make sure that you've got your marks, that you have your notches, and that you're meeting up with your tape. So now I have this piece established, and I can drape that piece to it, this piece to it, and proceed forward with my garment. So I'm going to keep working down and do the midriff next. And it's all the same process. Measure your length, add 5, measure your width, add 5 to get your square, or it's not a square, I'm sorry, to get your block that you're going to drape with. Okay, now this one I have a point right at center, so I don't really have a center front area that I want to put my grain line deeper into the panel so that I'm sure that it's there when I go to make my pattern. So again, like we did on the princess, just fold the block in half on the lengthwise grain and do a finger crease, and then draw your grain line down the center of the block. Okay, so we want to have this parallel to the center front, the straight grain. We want to make sure that it's high enough that I can get to this point over here. I'm going to put a couple pins center just to control the block, and then I can start pinning on my design line. Now, whichever side of your tape that you marked the first pass, you want to be sure and mark the same. This is only 1/8 of an inch wide, but you wouldn't mark the outside edge of the tape here and the inside edge on this piece, or you'd be adding fabric to your design, which was not desired. So. Okay, so let's see this one, what we have to do to get our nice fit. pins in here that are in my way. Okay, so it's just sort of rolling out here. Now at this point it's going below my waistline, so I'm going to have to do some clipping to reduce the stress here. So I'm getting it pinned up generally, and then I'm going to reduce some stress and do some trimming before I finalize it. So I can shadow this, trim it down to inch, inch and a half. It'll reduce the stress on each of them. You can see how this is doubling over, it's so stressed. So I'm just doing a rough trim. It's reduced a lot of that stress that's causing the fabric to curl. And then I can start to mark. Okay, so it's important that where I marked here is going to be a point. So I want to come right to that point. And I'm mimicking these marks on my first piece. So I know that they sew together. Remember, we had a side seam here. On this panel. Okay. So, nice and loose. I'm going to do a little clipping here so I can turn this under without it being stressed. Okay, so I'm matching up, I'm folding on my marks and matching up the marks with the previous. Making sure that they fit well. I'm just pinning it into the panel that I draped, the outer panel, not into the support bodice. We want to see how it hangs on its own. And it's taken on some curve because there's fit in this piece. You'll see it a lot better on the table. The curved shape that it takes. So I'll go back and trim this more neatly to a 1 inch from my marks. Okay, and then I have my peplum area that I'm going to drape. I want to mark my notches, so I'm sure that those line up. And I'm going to create a combination of notches here that won't be confused with this, so I wouldn't come down and do like that, but I could do one here and one here. Nice wide spacing so that it doesn't get confused with the other piece. Okay? Okay, so this is going to be a fold piece, so there's no fit there. It's all got to be in this seam or in the hip seam. Now, because this is a peplum and it's as a top, it's going to be worn over pants or skirt or some other garment, there needs to be extra fullness in here. So I'm going to go ahead and add my wearing ease just to be sure that I make it roomy enough for the final garment. There's also going to be lining and facing in here, so you need to make sure that you've allowed for that. Okay, and this is not going to touch the waistline. Whenever you have a horizontal seam at the waist, it can actually come in and touch the waistline. But these diagonal seams and princess lines, they sort of float, conform to the body, but they float away from the actual figure. So don't be trying to press this in and get it super, super tight in the waist area. We just want to make sure that there's enough room for a garment to be worn with it. And then I'm going to pin it in my marked seam on this piece. And I need to relieve a little bit of this pressure up here. Okay, so I know that that's got that room in there. trim off some of this extra. We can see what we're doing. And then go in and mark the same lines that we did on our midriff piece. Looking for that notch. Okay, so I've got my hem marked on here with the tape, so I'm just going to trace that off. Make sure you still got your 1/4 inch tuck, which gives you a 1/2 inch wearing ease there. Okay, I'm going to fold it under. Diagonal seams are bias or bias-y at least, and so they are a very effective tool to use for fit if you don't want, in your design, if you don't want to have darts or gathers or that type of thing. You can do these diagonal or horizontal seams and get a really good effect that way. Okay, so I want to confirm my notches from piece to piece. And I'm all done except for this top panel, which is, because it's seamless, like vertically seamless, it needs to, the length, the width of it, I'm sorry, the length is going to be from this point here to something level with this, because it comes clear down here. So my measurement for the length of it with the lengthwise grain is going to be 12 inches, which is very deep, okay? But you have to consider that. So plus 5 is 17, so 17 long. And then my width is going to be from center front all the way around to center back, which is measuring at 18, so that would be 23. We're going to put the straight grain at the center front, but as you can tell, it's there's no seam line there. So I want to put it deeper. I'm not going to put it all the way to the middle because this is such a long panel. So I'm just going to come over 4 inches into my block. And draw my grain line there, so that I'm sure I don't lose it in trimming and cutting. Okay, So I'm going to start at center front and work my way around to the back. And you can see that I'm going to need to be dropping my block if I want to get rid of the fit. If I go straight around, you see all the fits up here. If I drop my block, you see how the fit drops to the bottom and this stays nice and smooth. So I want to be sure that I have it up high enough that I don't run out of muslin in the center back. Okay, so I'm going to come up a little bit higher than I would normally. But that way I won't run out of fabric when I get to the back. So we've got our marked line that this has to intersect with because the point comes right to the center at the neck line. We've got our neckline that our support bodice has. This is the neckline that I'm going to be creating, or copying, sorry. So I'm pinning the block to the support bodice at this point on the sew line of the support bodice. And you can see the fullness here, but my seam is right here, so that will go away as ease. And I'm going to work my way around the bodice. I'm catching it in my stay stitch line, which is right on my sew line. And what this ends up doing is giving me a center back that's going to be slightly biased. Okay, so again, the marks that we make are always the sew line, so I'm following my stay stitch line. I want to give myself a notch where it matches this princess line of my support bodice, because your support bodice will be sewn to your external bodice. You also want a notch where it matches your side seam on the support bodice. Any intersecting seam should be indicated by a notch. Okay, now I'm going to trim some of this away, and you can see how angled this center back has become. Oops. Okay. And I've got a little bit of fullness in here. I'm not making this touch my tight to my support bodice. There's a little bit of fullness in here. That's totally fine. You don't want them to be so tight together that you're going to see all the boning through the outer layer. There we go. I'm having a hard time seeing that seam for a second. Okay, I've got a little bit of ease here. Which can be taken care of in the sewing step. Okay, I want to give myself that notch. And I'm going to give myself another notch over here because I want to be sure that that fullness stays in the bust area and doesn't scoot all the way down here. Okay, so I need to have a gather zone, or ease zone, I guess you would say. It's not really gathers. So I can't fold this down now because it goes over the back and I haven't draped my midriff in my back, but I'll pin this little piece here so you can get a better idea of how it looks. Okay, so this little area with the easing, just like we did on the support bodice, you want to sort of spread it out between your fingers so that it goes across the area where you want it. Okay, so I've got the point at the neckline here. I've got this point at center front, and it will be duplicated over there, so there'll be like a crossing here, an X. And this comes to the side seam at a V, as will this when I get my midriff on here. Okay. All right, that's all I'm going to demonstrate on the over bodice. And I'll show you where we get from here, but two things that you need to really pay attention to is be sure that you have enough wearing. When you're doing a top like this, it's obviously to be worn with a lower garment on the body. You need to be sure and have your wearing ease on your external bodice. On the support bodice, we had no wearing ease because we want it to be like a second skin. But this we want to have room. So you should, when you have it draped like this and pinned, you should be able to run your hands across it and see the muslin move rather than it being snug like this and not moving as you run your hands across. So remember, when I draped this, I added that 1/2 inch wearing ease. That would give a total of 2 inches around the hip, which is plenty unless you know that you're going to have a garment that's underneath there that's really full, very gathered, or something that it's going to need more than 2 inches. But 2 inches would be a good standard. And so this roominess in here is not a bad thing. You want that so that when the garment is fashioned out of fashion fabric, that you don't see the ridge of your boning and the princess line seams of your boned support bodice pressing against it. It should have a nice amount of wearing ease in there. This top edge needs to be very, very snug. Okay, so before you take it off of the form to create your pattern, you want to verify all your seams, that you didn't have to take a little extra, roll a little extra out to make things match, and do all your notching, reconfirm all your notches with a colored pencil. You always know when you're at the pattern table that a color line, whether it's purple or red, whatever you choose, is the final marking. So, you know, keep it in an orderly fashion, and that way when you're at the table you'll know that which ones to follow. But go through and confirm all of your notches. You want to have notches that match with any seam intersections of your support bodice, and that all your points or other intersections are true and your seam allowance, seam lines are correct.